The next panel is coaching strategies. And so in this panel, we'll learn about training coaches, recruiting coaches, and retaining coaches. And our panelists are Kristen Dieffenbach from the U.S. Center for Coaching Excellence, Paul Kakamo, Up to Us Sports, Deborah Shapiro, American Association of Adapted Sports Programs, and Allison Riley from Girls on the Run. So, Kristen.
After lunch, I'll keep you all awake and see if we can keep you all entertained. I'm not as good as Dr. Gould, but we'll see if I can get there. On behalf, oops, do we pull up my own slides or do we just, there we go. Okay. On behalf of the United States Center for Coaching Excellence, I'd like to thank the Department of Health and Human Services and the President's Council for Sports, Fitness, and Nutrition for allowing us to come and share with you a little bit about what we're doing and what our organization is about in our work in supporting systems of coach education and coach development. As she said when she introduced us, my name is Kristen Dieffenbach, and I'm an Associate Professor of Athletic Coaching Education at West Virginia University, but I'm also the President of the USCCE. And the USCCE provides leadership and guidance for coaching education and coach development systems in support of quality coaching to further the mission of quality youth sport and actually all sport athletes experience in the endeavors that they take under. Just to give you a little bit of a history of the USCCE, we're actually an organization that was originally started over 25 years ago inside of AFERD, which is now Shape America, and it was originally just an accreditation body in which we were accrediting organizations that did coaching education according to the national standards for sport coaches. In 2016, we were given the permission and the support of the board from Shape America to grow into our own organization with an expanded mission of supporting and educating around coach education and coach development needs. And we're all here because sport is just so important to all of us. It's part of what we do, it's part of who we are, it's part of so many of our backgrounds and our experiences. But we all know, as was highlighted this morning, no ball, no field, no game is what makes the positive impact for kids. It's not what it's about. It's about the quality people and how do we bring all of that together. And in this age where we know and we've acknowledged and we're talking about the damage that unethical coaches can do, we also need to talk about and acknowledge the damage that unprepared, unsupported, and untrained coaches can do when they're working with our kids in youth sports settings. And so as we think about that, and we know that kids don't just catch positive things from being in the game, we need to recognize that coaches don't just catch how to be teachers and leaders because they were athletes themselves. So with that in mind, we'll talk a little bit about the mission of the USCCE, which is really all around this idea of enhancing and elevating and enhancing the profession of sport coaching, coach education, and coach development through the integration of the research that we know from kinesiology, sports psychology, motor learning, motor development, sport pedagogy, all the important ology fields that inform what we do, all right? So we need to talk about these things to improve systems for better coaching, for better athlete experiences and outcomes. That's our end game, and that's what we're so important to all of us. I would say let's pause for a moment and think about this, but they only gave me 15 minutes, so we're not really going to pause. But I want you guys to think about that mission that we task to our volunteer youth sport coaches, all the people that are out there, that we want them to do positive youth development, quality physical activity, and we want to make sure that they teach the skills of movement correctly so that they can participate lifelong. And that's a pretty big ask on our volunteers and on our systems. So we really are looking at the systems piece of how do we do this. So our mission in action, we're taking a look at guided program development and evidence and systematic-based program review through a variety of different initiatives that I'll walk through and talk to you about. That was a catchy tune. So I want to be clear that we don't provide the programming. We aren't actually doing the coaching education ourselves. What we're working on and what we're trying to do is bring together all those systems and talk about what that standard and what all of those pieces are. So better coaching, better coach developers, better coaching education systems, for better coaches, for better athlete experiences and outcomes as we take a look at all of this. And ultimately we start thinking about our hats and what do we wear and at what level are we working. A systems approach to thinking through all of these important issues. And when we take a look at what's currently out there, and this is an important acknowledgement that Dr. Gould made this morning, There's a lot of organizations doing this. We have a database of over 400 different organizations that are doing something in this space of providing youth sport programming, providing coaching education, coach support, and none of them really work that closely together. There's 50 plus or so that are in the scholastic space in the high school sports, but those 50 organizations can all do their work differently in each state and how they train coaches and how they require coaches to work in the scholastic system. Our Olympic system has just about 50 national governing bodies, but they can all do their systems their own way in different ways, and you can't necessarily go and be a USA hockey coach and then step over into a baseball program and have those materials translate. There's not a lot of connection and conversation. And so if we're confused on this side, imagine where the parents are who are just trying to get the best quality experiences for their kids. And so we're working to try to work through some of that complexity and fragmentation. So I'll talk to you about our 3 key initiatives that relate to this mission of recruiting, training, and retaining quality coaches. So the first initiative that we want to talk about here is the awareness of the coach responsibilities and helping the systems understand what are those standards. We're always shocked when we realize that a lot of people don't know that there are a set of national standards for sport coaches. The 3rd iteration of these was just put out just recently by Shape America and is informed by the best practices and some of the top people in the field around the country. And they exist, and they've existed for about 20 years. This is just the most recent iteration. On the other side of the screen with lots of colors is from the International Sport Coaching Framework, from the International Council of Coaching Excellence, which is an international body passionate about this field. And both of them are based on the foundation that the coach, the person that's responsible for these tasks and responsibilities, has professional knowledge of the context and the area they're in, interpersonal knowledge and intrapersonal knowledge. And as we've heard from several of our speakers, we start to get into some really important things about inner city kids, kids with different types of abilities, all of these different things that has to inform. So if we're going to talk about athletic programming that's right for the children, right age, right stage, right context, we have to talk about leadership that's then prepared to be the right leadership for that age, stage, and context as well. So our second major initiative as we're working on the education piece is really taking a look at who are the coach educators and coach developers. Some of us are academic. Some of us also work in the public domain with NGBs in those areas. We also have the folks with the national governing bodies, the NGBs. We have folks in the scholastic systems. We have the for-profit and the nonprofit organizations. We have the single sport and we have the multi-sport. A lot of different organizations in which there are people who create content, who deliver content, who work with the coaches. How do we network ourselves together? Because we are a profession of people that are working with these folks and share best practices and stay connected. So we have the National Coach Developers Network that we've developed that is building and does podcasts and some different types of things. The Coach Development Summit is actually, the North American Coach Development Summit is actually something that's been about 22 years established. It used to be called the National Coaching Conference, if anyone has been to it. The summit brings together these key people to talk about these issues, talk about best practices, talk about what's working. And then we've partnered with the ICCE, the International Council for Coaching Excellence, to develop some workshops for the coach educators, for the leadership, to think about how do we work with the adult learners, the parents, the people that want to be good coaches? How do we help get the content to practice? And then just this past year, we have initiated a grant to start working on help people do some research on the best practices in coach development. Our biggest initiative, and the one that I think we are most proud of and that we're working on the hardest, is this Raise the Bar program. And this was a multi-year task force that worked to identify what are the issues and what are the concerns here. And we recognize that in the youth sport environment, most of the people that work with the coaches are volunteers themselves. And most of these programs are underfunded, undersupported, and don't have the background necessarily to bring in the best practices or the time or the resources and all of those types of things. So we really developed the Raise the Bar initiative to help support and provide guidance in the work that they're doing with youth sport coaches. And we really want to help in 3 phases. Right now we're focusing on raising awareness, then we're going to be focusing on helping with standards, and then to a point that was made earlier today, how can we help them, when that's not their prime initiative and what they do, evaluate and assess their effectiveness? So that's sort of where we're going as we work through this. Right now, the first stage is the Raise the Bar Pledge, which is out there and people can take. It's a free online, real easy 10, 15 minutes. And we're just asking organizations to recognize some basic information, their contact person, and a little bit of information about how they run their coaching programs, how they work with their volunteers. The numbers they take in, background checks, that they have a code of conduct and an anti-hazing, anti-bullying type statement. If they don't have a code of conduct or an anti-hazing, anti-bullying, we have some from some of the best organizations that have them out there that they can adopt and use. Again, we're not necessarily always developing. We're trying to make sure they're resourced to the great materials that are out there. There are so many great things being done around the country. And then, of course, we want to know a little bit about their program mission. And then as we move forward, coming soon, later this year, we'll be launching the Pledge Level 1. So after the organization has taken the pledge, they'll move into Level 1. And it'll be the documentation that they are creating training based on the most basic level of fundamental coach preparation. Many of the programs that we've seen here today and that I think we'll hear from in a few moments will have surpassed this. But we know that the vast majority of programs out there don't have anything in place. And so we're reaching out to those types of programs. That there's someone trained in first aid CPR, that there's an action plan for emergencies, and then the concussion training and safe sport. And as we look a little bit deeper into that training of the coaches, the head coaches of the leadership, we take a look at, we're asking that those head coaches have done something in the training. So we have the I Coach Kids program, which is out of the EU over in Europe, really fantastic fundamental training program. The How to Coach Kids, we've just brought that on as a potential that would satisfy this requirement. And of course, if they're in a program that's accredited by us from the USCCE, would hit the fundamental piece for this. And then we're also partnering with the U.S. Center for Safe Sports to make sure that the safe sport training that the youth sport organizations is something that they recognize as being a valuable leadership piece. And as we move forward, the pledge, like I said, is free. We want to keep that free, we want to keep that accessible because it's about raising awareness. And then how can we, and what we're doing with that is over time, rolling out information from them that's being culled from some of these leadership organizations that they can then use in their practices, okay? And then as we move on to the athlete benefits, that's what this is all about, right? This is who we're trying to serve, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to create a safer environment, an environment that's safe on all the different levels of the athlete experience, wherever they're coming from. A more consistent experience, increased enjoyment and satisfaction, because we know that will help with their motivation to stay and continue. Parents and coaches who are more informed about what youth sport programming should look like and what quality really means. It's always so distressing to me to talk to parents who are put up with a bad program because, oh, it's what my kid can do. And that shouldn't be acceptable, but they don't usually know that they have a voice. So how do we give them a greater voice? And then community members and parents that feel more confident about volunteering. And anybody in that volunteer space of youth sport coaches know that they say, I don't think I can do it. I don't know that I'm prepared. I don't know about this. If we can provide some of that standard and some of that guidelines, we're hoping to help with that recruitment and retention of coaches. And so as we come into looking at our contribution to this national sports strategy that we're so excited to see in the works, we're really interested in that idea of athlete age stage appropriate expectations for the coach responsibilities for athletes across all contexts and athletes of all abilities, right? The systems and resources to support the quality coach education and the quality coach development over time, and then the program administration's empowerment to raise the expectation and raise the bar in what quality youth sport coaching can be and what it should look like. So that's how you contact us, that's how you find us. And again, I'd like to thank everybody for listening and for being a part of this really exciting day.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to start also with just two quick stories. A child is in Chicago, and he is a teenager in school, and he is caught by the Chicago police in a drug run, and he ends up serving time in a juvenile facility. During that time, the only person who writes to him isn't a parent or a teacher or even a friend. It's a coach. And when that child gets out of that center, he walks 70 blocks to the west side of Chicago, to the boxing program that he was in, to say to the coach, you were the only one who wrote me. And he said to that coach, I pledge I will not make that mistake again. And a woman, a teenage girl in the South Bronx in New York, she's sitting in her public housing unit. Her grandmom, her great-grandmom, is 64 years old. She has only known poverty, but she's sitting there writing a college application. And at her side is her coach, helping her to get in. This is not about coaching or sports. This is about education policy, health policy, violence prevention policy, substance abuse prevention policy, and workforce development. My name is Paul Kakamo. I'm the founder and CEO of Up to Us Sports. I previously was the president for 11 years of America Scores, building that program across the country. Up to Us Sports is a national service program, the only national service program that provides coaches as mentors to low-income urban communities. We're also the leading program on training coaches in sports-based youth development and trauma-informed coaches, and trauma-informed coaching. We have hired more than 2,000 coaches since I started this program and placed them in more than 260 communities across the country. And right now this afternoon, and since I did not make slides, so you're only going to get me, I've decided, hey, I might as well bring a visual. But right now this afternoon, there are about 400 coaches wearing this, our uniform, in communities across this country, serving 52,000 kids right now. So I came here because I wanted to urge 4 things for this National Youth Sports Strategy. And the first one is that I believe we need a national core of coaches in this country. I believe that we especially need this core in underserved areas, in underserved urban communities, because there are sports deserts. And I think one of the things about speaking now is we've heard some of the themes, so I'll try not to spend too much time repeating. But the communities I work in, maybe there's a boys' basketball or football program if the high school's reputation was pitted on it. Otherwise, there's not a lot of variety of sports out there in low-income urban communities. And for girls, usually there's nothing. And I see it all the time in little pockets of Central City, South Central LA, the South Side of Chicago, nothing for girls. So the only way I think we can change this is if we get coaches on the ground. And the barrier, I think, for coaching in this country in underserved areas is purely economic. And as Bethany said earlier, a lot of coaches and a few people said, a lot of coaches in our communities, I got to take care of I'm the only caregiver in my family. My minimum wage job is keeping us in our housing. So I cannot coach. Well, we have to make it so I can coach. And the way we do that is by providing coach stipends for these young people, these young adults, to choose coaching over flipping burgers for minimum wage. Because the outcome of this is far too powerful to not take this opportunity. So I think it's possible, first of all. And in my own way, in my own organization, we're proving it. Partnerships with AmeriCorps, for example, have helped me to provide hundreds of coaches every single year as AmeriCorps volunteers who get AmeriCorps stipends. But this shouldn't just be an expansion of AmeriCorps opportunities as part of this strategy. There are other agencies out there that have a stake in the game, and we've said this and referred to this all day. The Department of Education used to have a Carol White grant, mainly to provide equipment and supplies. Let's revive a Department of Education grant to provide coaches in schools to participate in helping develop a school atmosphere in which kids can excel. The Department of Justice, OJJDP, we know when a kid has a coach who's trained in trauma, and we could talk about that in a second, we know that that coach is less likely to participate in violence. We know that kids who come out of that juvenile center in South Side of Chicago and walk over to their coach and say, I'm going to be in this program, I'm not going to mess up again, that sports and coaching reduces recidivism in this country. So I think OJJDP and DOJ should be putting some money into this game as well. And I also, of course, want to encourage HHS and the Department of Health, because this is physical activity, not just in developing these habits at an early age, but developing them for a lifetime. And every single study says a physically active adult was physically active, probably playing sports as a youth. So I also want to keep in mind that this should be a public-private partnership. In my own case, I got to thank Miami Heat, Baltimore Ravens, Los Angeles Dodgers, right down the street, the Washington Mystics and Wizards. I got to thank all those teams and their owners and their leagues, because they said, we know our stadiums are in the neighborhoods where kids are not playing sports, where kids are failing in school, where kids are exposed to violence. We know that. So let's invest in coaches around our communities. And so part of any investment by federal government agencies should be matched with a public-private partnership through teams, through leagues, because they have a skin in the game in making those neighborhoods where those stadiums are, where their future fans are, to be safer places for people to visit and for people to live. One last thing on this recommendation about a National Corps of Coaches is we need to be specific and intentional about female coaches, because a girl playing sports does not see a woman coaching sports. And until we address a pipeline in which young girls can see women being coaches just like men, we're going to continue to see this disparity at every level in youth sports. My second recommendation is that this National Youth Sports Strategy has a coach certification program in sports-based youth development. As everyone's alluded to today, most people who coach get the sport. They get it enough to coach kids. What they don't get is positive youth development. It's how do I create, and let me give examples, a team in which every kid belongs, a team in which every kid gets 60 minutes of physical exercise according to the CD standards. Also, when we're dealing with kids in low-income urban areas, a team that has such a strong culture and such rituals that a child says, I don't need to feel those rituals and that culture by being part of a gang, because that's what we're competing with. But if a coach knows how to build those rituals and that culture in a team, we have now buffered that kid. Another example I just want to talk, and this question keeps coming up, what does trauma-informed coaching really mean? Well, guess what? Remember, everyone, if you played sports, it's pretty stressful. You get triggered on a basketball court. We train our coaches specifically on what is the amygdala? What's firing in that stressful moment when you're the last defense at the end of the court? And we train the coaches, your job is to exercise that kid's frontal lobe, to point out when they're starting to think up here and make decisions at a moment of stress. Because if you can exercise it and show a kid how they are showing efficacy in dealing with stress and trauma, right? Well, it's not trauma there, it's stress. They'll be able to show those same non-cognitive skills when they're actually triggered in the park or in school. But it takes exercising young people's brains to realize that they can handle stressful situations. We train our coaches exactly how to do that. So I strongly believe we need to create a certification program that every coach in schools, parks, and nonprofits should participate in. My third recommendation, in homage to how we started today, we need money to evaluate these programs. We need some big funding opportunities to let sports programs like mine and many who are presenting today take a deeper dive. Now, we've done 2 external evaluations, and I will tell you, we have seen statistical improvements in health, in overall, and we measure that by overall fitness. We've seen it in nutrition, and we've seen it in social emotional learning skills from the youth that they have displayed that help them make better decisions, like staying in school, not joining a gang. I've also learned 3 things from our studies so far. One is dosage really matters. Programs that give kids a chance to play sports regularly and not just, a weekend sport are far more effective in outcomes. Second is that it really matters if our coaches are trained and that they're intentional. It doesn't come natural to understand how to get every kid an opportunity to lead when coaching sports. There are techniques for doing that. There are techniques for getting kids to partner up, not just saying partner up and walking away. There are techniques for getting different kids to know each other in a team so that they form bonds. So training matters. The third thing is implementation matters. Because we could train coaches, but if we're not reinforcing it so they implement the practices, then we'll lose the full level of gains that we can make. So implementation matters. The challenge with studies is we really need a randomized control study. And that's a lot of money. And you've heard that a lot of us have done self-reporting because we even if it's external, the kids have to self-report. We don't have a randomized control group in the same neighborhood in Chicago, in Miami, in New Orleans. So we need to get the funding to do that because if we get and show what sports really does, we're going to pay for this program times 100. So my final recommendation is about sports itself. And that is that sports, and we all know this, it's a grassroots, community-based activity. We don't need new sports programs. We need to find out who are the programs in the community and how do we build their capacity to serve more kids. Where do I recruit my coaches? I go to the local school, the local park, and the local nonprofit, and I ask them, who's a kid in this community who maybe graduated from high school who would be a great coach? 85% of my coaches come from within a mile of where they're coaching. They are solving the issue of sports deserts. So we need to continue to stay in focus that any strategy has to be grassroots, not just school systems, park systems, and definitely I love working with large nonprofit systems, but also that makeshift program in that public housing that may be the only opportunity. How do we find them? They know the coaches, they know where they're playing, they know the needs of the community. So I want to conclude by saying that we spend, as a country, $21 billion in incarcerating young people. It's $500,000. San Francisco Examiner, I think it was, did an article last week. It's $500,000 now in Oakland to incarcerate a kid for a year. 21 billion, and that doesn't include the cost of damage that crime can do to the victim. That statistic alone, if I had that much money based on how much I'm spending right now to build an AmeriCorps program of coaches in this program, if I had that $21 billion, I'd be able to serve all year long 162 million kids. Do you know the problem with that? That's twice as many kids as live in America. So I just want to thank this administration for finally putting sports in the spotlight and for creating the leadership that is in this room to create a strategy that says this isn't just about a kid playing a game. This is about a kid achieving potential. Thank you.
I'm not quite as theatrical, but, and I'm really quite thrilled to be here because I feel like people have mentioned disability as part of a demographic of underserved populations. And that's really what this organization focuses on, is serving people with physical disabilities. And so I'll talk a little bit about what we do and how we do it with regards to coach recruitment, training, and retention. And I also want to reflect on some of the comments that have been made previously about some of the issues that while we are, as you'll see through this presentation, we're very much a school-based program, but I'd like to expand that thinking of programming not just to underserved populations with minority representation, but consider disability as part of that grouping as well. So I'm here representing the American Association of Adapted Sports Programs, or I'm going to shorten that term to ASP. The American Association of Adapted Sports Programs, or ASP, has been committed for over 20 years to the development and support of structured, sustainable, and developmental programs and competitions to improve the well-being of students with disabilities who attend elementary, middle, and high schools. The ASP model has been in place since 1996 and ensures that students with physical disabilities have the opportunity to experience the benefits of school sport competition just as their peers without disabilities. So ASP develops interscholastic adapted team sports in partnership with national, state, and local education agencies. The school year begins with wheelchair handball in the fall, wheelchair basketball during the winter season, and wheelchair football and track and field during the spring season. All students participate in wheelchairs, whether or not they need one for activities of daily living. This helps to level the playing field and engages more students with physical disabilities in athletics. As we've heard from other programs, our program is similar in that most of our student athletes compete in multiple sports. And if they begin participating in elementary school, they can train for over 10 years in both practices and competitions. An adapted team sport is similar to a Paralympic-style competition and differs from Special Olympics in that our programming is focused on students with physical disabilities or impairments instead of individuals with intellectual disabilities. Adapted sports accommodate students who have a range of physical impairments or limitations that prevent them from taking part in traditional school sports. The rule modifications consider the ability and functional levels of the players, making team sport competition possible. This method offers an interscholastic competitive environment in regular and postseason competitions at both the junior varsity and varsity levels of play. As an inclusive program, interscholastic adapted team sports are part of the school district's extracurricular activities provided through athletics or special education. This allows our participants to take part in school sports in a normal, integrated, and inclusive environment. Just as a traditional school sports, adapted team sports are an extension of the school day. With regards to recruitment, the school district works directly with their personnel to identify adapted school sport coaches. These individuals may be related service providers such as physical or occupational therapists or therapeutic recreation specialists. They may also be direct service providers such as adapted physical education teachers, classroom teachers of students with orthopedic impairments, or general education or general physical education teachers. Coaches may also be recruited through the schools from administrators or current or retired coaches of varsity or junior varsity able-bodied school teams. Because this is a school program, the school districts support the teams with equipment, uniforms, and coaching stipends, like we've been hearing the importance of so far throughout this morning, just to help to support the teams just as they do for able-bodied athletics. The school districts send their adapted sports coaches to ASP for training. ASP has rules, handbooks, and skills and drills manuals that are available for free on the ASP website. All our coaches are required to take the training course for the sports they're coaching. In most cases, our coaches get training and certification and coach all three sports of wheelchair handball, basketball, and football. ASP has also developed partnerships with physical education, teacher education programs across the country to train general and adapted physical education pre-service teachers using their ASP resources. At the completion of these university courses, students can earn ASP coaching certifications. When these pre-service health and physical education teachers graduate and enter the schools, they're ready to become coaches and develop their own programs. Further, the ASP program education training consists of some of the following content. From a coaching philosophy perspective, coaching an adapted sports team is similar to coaching a traditional school team. Coaches come to practice with the same expectations they would have for their able-bodied teams, such as mandatory attendance, being on time, and giving 100% of your effort on and off the court. Coaches adhere to a behavior mastery orientation rather than an outcome or performance focus. Coaches work with our athletes to develop personal and team goals at every level of involvement, from practices to games. There are some unique content knowledge that is needed for coaching athletes with physical disabilities. Our athletes, like I said, have orthopedic impairments that are defined under federal law of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So some of these disabilities may include cerebral palsy, spina bifida, spinal cord injuries, amputee, and muscular dystrophy. In fact, ASP services students with over 40 different types of physical impairments. Coaches must be knowledgeable about the types of disabilities the students have, as well as precautions associated with the disability. So for example, we know that fatigue can negatively impact the performance of students with cerebral palsy through increasing their muscle tone, creating less agility, or decreased ability and grip strength. So understanding this functional abilities of each student athlete allows the coach to maximize their training and place athletes in positions on the team where they can be most effective and best contribute to the success of their team. Coaches also receive training on the field of play with regard to the terms of the court for each adapted sports to educate their student athletes about the rules associated with the sport, as well as the court setup and player positions. A large focus of our training is also on the skills, drills, conversions, and strategies. ASP training and guidebooks break down the needed skills into two categories: wheelchair handling skills and ball handling skills. The training and manuals illustrate fundamental techniques of wheelchair sports. These skills are then broken down and task analyzed into teachable components. Each skill description addresses the goals and points that coaches should emphasize during training. Drills and skills for practicing are included not only in the manuals, but also in the trainings to help coaches put these skills into actions. Also, ASP has a standardized approach to interscholastic sports programming. We have published competition rules, standardized seasons, safety guidelines, officials training, compliant guidelines, and inclusive policies that have contributed to the long-term success of the programs. With regards to equipment setup and maintenance, most wheelchairs can be adjusted to maximize the athlete's sitting and pushing maneuverability, speed, and safety. Many athletes need support in positioning, such as a seat cushion or a lap strap, to help them keep the ball in their lap while pushing their chairs. Understanding what is needed and how to maintain and repair the chairs is critical in ensuring athletes' safety and team success. Because the same wheelchairs are used for wheelchair basketball, handball, and football, having a basic wheelchair toolkit and knowing how to repair the chairs during practices and games is essential to keep the players safe and in the game. ASP has also partnered with the National Federation of State High Schools to develop an online adapted sports coaches education course. This course covers eligible students, the formation of teams using what we call a district-wide approach, which differs from the individual school approach that is very common in able-bodied school athletics. This training also focuses on how to survey the school districts to identify where students with disabilities are located so that you can identify the most geographically convenient location for practices and games. So again, it's bringing the programs to the students. They focus on how to identify and group athletes in specific positions or roles on the team based on their functional ability, the differences between junior varsity and varsity with regards to that functional ability, the sports themselves, the sports season schedule, and lastly, the coach in class focuses on adapted basic skills. The course is expected to be released this summer on the NFHS Learn channel. With regards to retention, the retention rate of coaches is unique compared to that of able-bodied sports. Because our coaches are recruited from the schools within their own personnel, there's very little turnover. Coaches tend to coach all three of the adapted sports of wheelchair basketball, handball, and football throughout the school year. ASP also provides direct support to the school's administration, coaches, officiating, parents, and athletes. The officials training program offered by ASP ensures fair and knowledgeable officiating and meaningful competition, which keeps people coming back. The structure and organization of the sports seasons supports coaches in the development of their players' skills and tactical knowledge. We begin with wheelchair handball specifically, and then move progressively into wheelchair basketball and wheelchair football because they are more tactical and skillful. Coaches also continue to engage with the teams, recognizing that the results are not measured season to season, but rather year to year. This process-based approach over the long term leads to stronger and meaningful relationships with the players and their families in ways that may not be typical in many able-bodied sports. Lastly, because our coaches come from the schools, our programs allow coaches and administrators to earn professional recognition as pictured here. Mike Phillips began his career coaching high school football, moved into athletic administration, and for the last 10 years has coordinated the adapted sports program for one of the largest school districts in Atlanta. He was recently inducted into the Georgia Athletic Directors Association Hall of Fame and recognized for his work with ASP. Here's a quick, oh, no, let's go back here. The video doesn't want to work. No. I was going to say there's a quick video here. Anybody? There we go. Oh, what am I doing? There we go. Oh, they do it up there. Thank you. Okay. So this video will highlight a little bit about the regards to coach retention.
Deserving high school student athlete excelling on and off the field in Central Georgia. Jonathan Perez introduces us to Houston County Sharks standout Jordan Kozlowski and tells us why Jordan is our athlete of the week.
But this is what I'll never forget. When I look back on my high school career, I forget it.
It's been quite the run for Jordan Kozlowski. She's won a wheelchair basketball championship with the Houston County Sharks 7 straight years.
Jordan's a leader. She has a major work ethic. She's one of those kids that when practice is over, it's not over for her.
She's never been one to quit. After losing her leg in an accident as a toddler, she later joined the Sharks as a second grader, where the team transformed her tragedy into a treasure.
Without these people back here, I haven't grown to the athletic person I am today. Like I said, just really supportive. You know, it means a whole lot. I have a special place in my heart for it, and I'll never ever forget them.
11 years with the Sharks has paid off. Not only has the Houston County senior been a part of a dynasty,
You know, when she rolls on the court, they all look up and they know that she's gonna lead them to the win.
but she's also used her wheels to go west, continuing her basketball and academic career at the University of Arizona.
She started playing with us when she was 9, and you know, she's an 18-year-old young woman fixing to go off to play in college. So just watching that maturity develop, those skills develop, I mean, it's just been a blessing for me to be a part of that.
And she believes basketball could be her purpose.
You never know what God has in store for you. I mean, I didn't know what He has in store for me, but I guess this is it.
To encourage others to take the biggest shot that matters most.
Leave a wheel print, is what Alex said. And, you know, leave an impact on these people and just showing them that even though you have disability, that does not stop you from achieving your dreams.
Because their dreams are still worth chasing after. Jonathan Perez, 13 WMAZ Sports.
As you heard, Jordan is going after her dream. She will sign with the University of Arizona later this month to play intercollegiate wheelchair basketball. Also plans on studying criminal justice out in the desert.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So ASP is proud to partner with schools and school districts to offer support in the recruitment, training, and retention of quality coaches for youth with physical disabilities. Thank you for this opportunity to share our best practices with you.
Are we all still awake in here? We do these energy awards at Girls on the Run, and I was playing with having you do one, but I thought you probably wouldn't appreciate that. So I'm Allison Riley. I'm honored to serve as the Senior Vice President of Programming and Evaluation at Girls on the Run International. Thank you so much for including us in this very important dialogue today. So first, I'm going to lay the foundation by providing some background of Girls on the Run, and then I'll share some strategies that have allowed us to both recruit and train over 53,000 coaches a year at Girls on the Run. I think it's always important to start with our mission because that's really what drives all the work that we do. So Girls on the Run is a physical activity-based positive youth development program, and our mission is to inspire girls to be joyful, healthy, and confident using an experience-based curriculum that creatively integrates running. And we do this work from coast to coast through our 200-plus councils. So we're in all 50 states and DC as well. And we engage 100,000 volunteers, 53,000 of which are coaches, to serve over 200,000 girls annually. And these programs are primarily delivered in the after-school space, either in schools or recreation centers. And we've served 1.6 million girls since our inception in 1996. And these 1.6 million girls come from all walks of life. So they're diverse in race and ethnicity, culture. Almost 50% receive financial support, totaling about $13 million a year. They also have a range of physical activity and fitness levels. And I'm proud to share that we are currently partnering with the National Center on Health, Physical Activity, and Disability to ensure that our program is accessible for girls with disabilities. So we're working on an inclusion guide as well as additional coach training to ensure our coaches are prepared. We want every girl to be able to experience Girls on the Run. So this image kind of shows you our process and impact. So typically held in after-school space, our trained volunteer coaches deliver our intentional curriculum, and I'll talk a little bit more about each of those in a minute. And those are designed to impact confidence, competence, character, connection, and contribution, and of course physical activity. So we incorporate running and other physical activities with life skills through our intentional curriculum. And the program culminates with a 5K event, and you can see Lainey here. I just love this picture. And really, when girls complete that 5K, they see that the seemingly impossible is possible, and it really does just inspire them to continue to be involved in physical activity. And so with over 330 Girls on the Run 5Ks across the country, we're actually the largest race series in the country. We have 3 different programs. So Girls on the Run is for elementary school girls, so 3rd to 5th grade. Heart and Soul is 6th to 8th grade. And then we just launched our 1-week program, Camp Goater. So Girls on the Run and Heart and Soul are both 10 weeks with girls meeting in teams 2 times a week. And then the Camp Goater is 1 week for all week, 4 hours a day. And those are different, they follow the same philosophy as the slide I just shared, but the way that we approach the topics are specific for the age group and also the structure of the program. And as Dr. Weiss shared earlier today, we do have evidence of impact, so I'll just share a few highlights from that since she went into it a little bit earlier today. So we saw the greatest improvements in confidence and connection. So girls, over the course of the program, they improved in how much they liked the kind of person they are and how happy they felt with the way they looked, as well as they were more likely to say that they have classmates who like them the way they are. And we were thrilled to see this finding, but the girls that started with the lowest levels of physical activity increased by over 40%, and that was maintained. So we really are trying to provide girls with exactly what they need through the program. And finally, 97% of girls learn critical life skills in Girls on the Run that they're using in other areas of their lives. So I share these findings again because, as we've heard throughout the day, the quality of coaching is essential to the impact that we can have through sport. So we don't catch character through sport, we need to teach it. And so we've placed a very high priority on both recruiting and training our coaches. So I'm going to start with some recruitment strategies. And So as I mentioned, we engage over 50,000 volunteer coaches a year and have a number of strategies, but I'll talk about 3 here. So casting a wider net to diversify the coaching pool, utilize mission-focused targeted messages, and employ a national and local multifaceted strategy. So if you think about the characteristics of a youth sport coach, what comes to mind? In general, is our coaching pool as diverse as the kids that we want to get involved and to stay involved in sport? Are they seeing themselves in those sport contexts? So because our view of coaches is often very narrow, we need to look at how do we widen, how do we diversify that pool? So at Girls on the Run, over 95% of our coaches are women. So that's quite different than the national landscape. And we have strategies in place to not just recruit our typical coach, so somebody who sees the name Girls on the Run and wants to sign up, but the coach that sees the name and says, but I'm not a runner. But really, if we're thinking about what success is for us in youth sport, we want that person as well if they care about mentoring kids. So this image showcases one of our current initiatives. It's a National Coach Ambassador Program, so we've engaged 16 women who are coaches for us of all backgrounds, geography, body size, race, ethnicity, just to be able to share their experience. We know that word of mouth is so powerful, and so we want other coaches to see that they too can coach, that our coaches really do come from all backgrounds. So that's helping, one strategy we're using to cast this wider net. And then how do we recruit those diverse coaches? So we have really focused on mission-focused messaging. So if we want it to be about more than the sport, then who we recruit and how we recruit them, we want to start with that message right out. So what is it, really is it that coaches are doing when they're working with our kids? So as I mentioned, when people see the name Girls on the Run, they assume you have to be a runner, which is not the case. And the same is true for youth sport. You hear that and you assume either I can be a coach or I can't be a coach based on your background. So here's some messaging from our latest campaign. So life comes at girls fast. Will you be the role model she needs to succeed? And then we have a new You Belong campaign, some of the messaging with that. Join the movement. Girls in your community need you to be the person who makes a huge impact in their lives. Learn how you can empower girls in your area as a volunteer Girls on the Run coach. We've also learned that just posting a flyer or sending out a mailer is not enough for someone to think about coaching and then to actually take the step to become a coach. So we employ a variety of channels, website, digital, word of mouth, in order to engage these coaches. So as we do that, we want to first inspire, then inform, and then a call to action. And that's really where that interplay between the national and the local is critical. So they might hear about Girls on the Run, but what is that handoff between the national PR and then that local council that is actually going to engage the coaches on the ground? And then once we recruit those coaches, how are we preparing them? So we know that confident and prepared coaches play a critical role in creating this safe and inclusive environment where girls can learn and be physically active. So I'm going to talk about 3 strategies related to that. So give coaches what they need to keep kids coming back, provide ongoing training and support, and making training a priority for all stakeholders. Okay, so once kids decide they want to participate, it's really the job of the coach to keep them coming back, and I do mean all kids. We've heard that a couple of times today. How do we get the kid who thinks about physical activity and loves it, and the one that may not be the hook for them? That's not why they're showing up. So whether a coach has limited past experience or brings their own baggage from sports, so they were coached a certain way and they're bringing that into the work they're doing with kids, we need to give them what they need to succeed. And for us, that is our intentional curriculum as well as training. So we have a blended training model where coaches do online training and then in person prior to coaching. So our intentional curriculum is both informed by research and also work in the field. So hearing from voices of girls, another thing that has come up a lot today. So what are those relevant topics? But then how do we make the curriculum open enough that any girl can engage with it no matter where she is in her development or what's going on in her life? We incorporate games and activities. Energy awards are a great way that we have fun out at practice. It's all about fun and also being able to master this goal at the end. So they're working their way to participating in this 5K. And many girls, when they start, don't have in their mind that they could actually complete that at the end. And so then once the coach has a curriculum in hand, they can stay focused. So what is success? It just brings them back to why we're here, and that it's not just about the physical skills that we're developing. But then we also know that the curriculum book isn't enough. We need coaches to be prepared to go out and create this positive, inclusive environment. So before the start of training, our coaches participate in, as I mentioned, the online and in-person training, and they watch videos of coaches in the field. They practice themselves. They learn best practices in building relationships, positive, inclusive environment, which that includes girl voice. How do we use positive behavior management strategies, as well as just how to be more inclusive, using inclusive language. And then mastery climate, focusing on that individual improvement. Also girl development, and then how to actually implement the curriculum. And woven throughout that is a coach understanding their own context and background and what they bring to the work with the girls. So what is it that they're bringing? How can they understand that girls are going through a variety of things? As I mentioned, our girls come from all backgrounds. And so how can that coach really interact in the best way with the girls? And then it's not just enough to train them from the beginning and send them out and say, good luck to you. But our councils conduct site visits, so they'll go out and support the coaches. Often one small thing can be changed to change an entire experience, not only for the girls, but also for the coaches. And so our councils are able to go out and support that work in the field. And then we have a coach training pathway. So coaches receive that first training, and then they have opportunities to participate in training throughout their coaching life cycle. And a lot of times, it's just getting them back and reconnecting with why we're out there doing this work to begin with. But preparing coaches to make an impact, as we've shared, takes a lot of resources and stakeholder buy-in at all levels. So in order to engage in this, everyone from our CEO to the leaders of all of our councils to our coaches on the ground have to be bought in that this is important. Coaching is important. Coach training is important. It takes a lot of time and energy. And so we've trained over 600 local staff. We use a train-the-trainer model, so we have a 2-day training of those individuals that then lead the coach training in the community. But I think if we want to change the narrative of youth sport, the measure of success has to change, and it can't, as Dan mentioned earlier, it cannot be just what we explicitly state as being the important measure of success in youth sport, but what's implicit at all levels. And I think that's going to take, again, involvement from parents, from coaches, all the way up the chain. So I love what one of our girls wrote here at the bottom. Sometimes I walk or run because it feels great, right? So it doesn't matter. We always say you can walk, skip, hop, jump, and now we say roll or push as long as you're moving forward. And I think that's just critical. Like, we need to have that lens. And I will end with a story about one of our girls. This is Spirit on the left. So she lives in Texas and sent us this picture along with a letter when she was in the 3rd grade. Girls on the Run has changed my life. I've been running for 3 months. I'm learning that rumors are bad. All of the coaches are very nice and helpful, and I feel better about myself. I can feel my body getting stronger. I've always felt weak. I've always been the smallest in my class, and I'm often sick. When I was born, I weighed 1 pound and 5 ounces. But since joining Girls on the Run, I don't feel small anymore. I'm a strong girl, and my size doesn't matter. In my 5K, I came in last place. But I didn't feel bad. I felt good because I finished. I'd like to thank Girls on the Run and Coach Shire for believing in me and helping me believe in myself. And then here is Spirit, who wrote to us again after her last season of Girls on the Run in 5th grade. Girls on the Run has been an inspiration. When I first started, I thought it was all about running, but it's about making the right decisions in life. In 3rd grade, I didn't have many friends until I started Girls on the Run. Now I have great friends. I felt I was a weak person and always doubted myself. Now every day, I try to have a confident attitude and a smile on my face. In my first 5K, I came in last place. At my last Girls on the Run 5K, I tied with an amazing person, Serena. We both made first place. We didn't want to race each other, so we decided to tie. Coach Shire taught me to make wise decisions and how to love not only my family, but others I meet. I guess that was a lesson in bravery, since everyone used to scare me. She taught me how to love myself and to be proud of myself. Coach Shire is my inspiration. And then here is Spirit today, who now has the aspirations of becoming an Olympic swimmer. So she has evolved quite a bit over time, and I think I share that story just because the value of coaching, as again we have heard today, it's more than the sport, it's more than being a coach just in that moment. It's about inspiring youth to be their best selves, and I think certainly that girls deserve that opportunity. They deserve to be able to see women who are going to be role models for them, so that they can pursue also that lifestyle of not only physical health, but emotional and social health as well. So I appreciate being a part of this conversation. Certainly our organization does, so I look forward to the next steps and being involved along the way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for that informative program. I wish I was young enough to participate. But anyway, so we're opening up for questions again. We have 15 minutes. You know the drill, feds first, but I don't think that's an issue anymore, so. Okay, I see 2 hands.
Hi, Allison Riley, ODPHP. I have a lot of questions, so I might take all of the Fed time. This is the part that I'm focusing on. So for Paul, can you describe more specifically the recruitment strategies that you have? You said you're going into those communities to find the AmeriCorps members.
Yeah, it's the only way we've been able to find coaches, and we made a very intentional decision that our coaches need to reflect where the communities they're from. And we tried numerous tactics, and we would end up getting outside the community. So the most effective way we found is to work with the community-based organizations that are there. So if we go to Baltimore, which we're in now, we'll go and look at the neighborhoods we want to be. Where are the community-based sports programs? Where are the local schools in that neighborhood, the local park, commission, superintendent of that local park, and really build relationships and ask them, who are the young people here? Because they know the young people in the community, and that's been our most effective strategy so far.
Thanks. And for ASP, can you talk about the barriers that you have to coach recruitment? You said that it's more on the district level and that you have great retention, which is awesome. So can you talk about the barriers to recruiting those coaches, and then also a little bit more about the retention piece?
I'm not sure I can talk about the barriers to the recruitment, because ASP itself doesn't do the recruitment. It's the school districts that do the recruitment. So what ASP does is that it hires, or the school districts hire a coordinator, And that coordinator then works with the school districts to identify people in that school district who would be interested in coaching. So again, ASP is a school district level program, because if you think about it, there's probably not enough kids at any one school to create an adapted sport team, so they pull from a whole school district. So you have a lot more opportunities to recruit teachers when you're looking at, several hundred from a particular school district. And so we work with IDEA and look at who are the related service providers. So they could be speech therapists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, or the direct service providers, which are your general education, adapted PE, special education teachers, and or coaches who just happen to have a knowledge of basketball or handball or football, and then they learn a little bit about the coaching of the athletes with disabilities. That's the unique training component of it that ASP offers. And then they go out and they use it. So the same plays, it's the same playbook. In wheelchair football, you still have your passing routes and your running routes, and they're all virtually the same terminology as an able-bodied football. Only difference is you're playing it on a gym floor instead of on a turf field, so that everybody can push that chair equally as effectively. So in terms of the recruitment, it all comes through the school districts and with the help of that area coordinator, who again is hired by the school district to sort of manage that adapted sport team in that school.
Thank you. The next two are for all of you, so nobody feels left out. I like to be inclusive. The first one, I'll ask one that might just be a yes or no. Do you all have volunteer officials also for your sports, or just coaches? And what kind of training did they get if you're doing officials, referees, that sort of thing?
I can start with that. ASP has an officials training program for each of their 3 sports. And so the officials are paid, and they have the full uniform, and they officiate on, for many of them do all 3 sports. Some of them just focus on a particular sport if that's their interest. But it is an official training program that's offered by ASP, and then there are paid positions for officiating, just like they're paid positions for the coaches.
So all of our coaches are stipended volunteers, and we do not run a program at Up to Us Sports. And so the model I suggest about a national coach corps is that the programs are there. So I place my coaches in schools, parks, and nonprofits that are already in the communities to help them grow, serve more kids, maybe start a girls program, maybe start a boys program. But that's how we work. So your question then, we don't work with the officials specifically.
Yeah, and for the USCCE, we're sort of in the same position. We're working with the training of coaches and the support of the coach development systems, but we do know that within a lot of those organizations that the recruitment and training of the officials is an important issue, and there are some really important parallels when you start looking at it being a youth sport environment and what are the lessons and the purposes of it. So we partner with and talk to some of those groups, but that's not a main core of what we do.
We don't have officials.
Right.
Allison, hold on for a minute. Does anybody else have a question?
If I can just...
I just have one more. Okay. Well, if it's quick. Okay, we'll come back. Okay. Thank you. I saw hands. Now I don't.
Katrina Pierce, ODPHP, mainly for Deborah, but also thinking more broadly. So you talked about physical disabilities, and I wonder if there's anything that you all are involved with dealing with intellectual disabilities, or anything from a coaching standards that you all think about that piece and how to, adapt programs or adapt coaching techniques and strategies to accommodate a variety of physical and mental abilities.
Yeah, so our athletes, or the athletes that come through the public schools, their primary disability is orthopedic or physical impairments. Some of them may come from special education programs where they may have IEPs for particular educational academic goals, but intellectual disability is not their primary disability diagnosis, if you will. ASP looks at their programming as physical disability, like modeling the Paralympics, and Special Olympics serves that sort of population of people with intellectual disabilities. And so we're really servicing a need for people in competitive sports that's not being serviced through Special Olympics, because our athletes wouldn't qualify for Special Olympics. And just like their athletes wouldn't qualify for our programming, because the modifications, the rules, the level of competition is different.
And then we have worked with NICPAD. They use a grades model where they take evidence-based programs and adapt them for youth with all different types of disabilities. So they've gone through our curriculum and have identified both environmental factors, communication, as well as individual lesson by lesson opportunities to adapt the curriculum for kids with disabilities so the kids can participate right alongside the girls who don't have a disability.
Yeah, and from a USCCE perspective, you know, we recognized, and I mentioned before, that there's the National Standards for Sport Coaches, which is some of the best practices out there from the leading organizations for youth sport coaching. But we're also talking to some of the other organizations about what are those best practices within cognitive disabilities, with the Paralympic world, with trauma-based coaching. What are those recommendations that we need to pull together so that we can acknowledge the programs that are doing a great job, but also acknowledge the programs that maybe have gotten into the space but aren't evidence-based practice. And so there's certainly lanes within all of those that are so important.
Very quickly, we have had numerous adaptive sports programs come to us and ask us to support through AmeriCorps coaches. And we have placed them, but it is up to our training stops at the positive youth development, how to deal with trauma, and it's up to the local program then to go on and do the local training around working with kids with physical or intellectual disabilities.
Oh, I see a couple of hands.
Thanks. Allie, you just mentioned how Girls on the Run integrates girls with and without disabilities. And Deborah, I was wondering if you could speak to whether that's a model that ASP also uses and or that ASP recommends or doesn't, and what the pros and cons might be of, you know, having a space that is just for kids with disabilities, and also, you know, the flip side of that of having spaces that are integrated. And when we think about like a national strategy, what is kind of the gold standard of doing that work?
Before they answer, your name,
Sure.
please?
Risa Assard with Kaboom.
Thank you.
Oh, I think
All right, so in terms of ASP with the integration, we look at our programs as being integrated into the schools. So our teams are not specifically integrated because boys' teams aren't integrated and girls' teams aren't integrated. You know, boys don't play on the girls' teams, girls don't play on the boys' teams. So we follow that sort of Paralympic model that says we don't have to have individuals without disabilities on our teams to make them competitive. And we don't have to have people without disabilities on our teams for kids with disabilities to help them to build their skills. Our programs do that through the coaching. But those programs are inclusive because they're in the school systems, and our competitions and our tournaments and our championships are held at the same time in the same venues as like the state basketball championship and the state track and field championships. We have wheelchair, you know, divisions for that, and we have a wheelchair basketball championship at the state basketball championship events. So the program is inclusive within the schools, but the teams are not. Having said that, though, if a team is just getting, or a school district is just getting started and they're having trouble recruiting, they can include kids without disabilities up until the point where they have enough to form a team. And at that point, we encourage them to do that. So we don't really look to try to include kids with and without disabilities on the team because that's not the function, and we don't believe that's necessary for good quality sport or fair competition.
Oh, sure. And I think with running as well, as it not being a team sport, I think it provides that with that opportunity, and having both opportunities to be included in the environment with kids with and without disabilities, and then an opportunity just with kids with disabilities.
Okay. Yes, thank you. And then Allison will get you.
Melissa Otterbein, George Washington University, Department of Exercise Science. So one thing we heard from earlier from the Aspen Institute was the focus on collective impact and it being such a strong strategy for sharing best practices and lessons learned in the field. So I'm curious about, you know, we've heard today from so many different organizations with different coaching curriculums and models. To what extent do you think we all are sharing and communicating with each other? And then to what extent do you think that the National Youth Sports Strategy could use somewhat of a helpful tool such as collective impact?
I'll start with that one from the USCC perspective. the leaders in the field, like up to us and some of these, I know that they talk to each other, and we've had the opportunity with like USA Hockey, we could do a good bit of work with them, and USA Swimming, and some of those groups that are leading, they are talking to each other. The problem is that the places that they get to, the resources they have, they're talking to each other but not getting it out. So they're not being able to take it back out to all those other programs and those pieces and those places that are small or startup or bits and pieces. And so we have great stuff that's going on that nobody else knows about. Just like we have great research in the kinesiology field and guidelines and leadership in a lot of these topic areas, but nobody out there knows about it. And Dan mentioned earlier, we're an entrepreneurial society in which people can just start something up. The National Coaching Report that we're revising and rebuilding, these 400 organizations, some of them have absolutely no one on their board or anything in their leadership that has anything to do with an educational initiative or any of those pieces. And so we've got absolutely amazing stuff that nobody knows about, and then tons of other stuff cluttering the landscape that there's no way to measure and evaluate them by. And that's part of what the USCCE is doing, is trying to say, okay, collectively, we know what's important, how does it matter, how do we come together and do that? And that's what I'm really excited about, the potential for a national sports strategy.
I agree. You know, our program is at its starting point is a partnership of more than 1,800 school systems, parks, departments, and nonprofits. That's how we get coaches on the ground in the communities. But I do want to, so there is, by nature, everything is open source, all our training, we try and train. Just in Chicago last week, the parks, the schools, and the community-based programs all are asking for the same training. They're all like, help our athletic staff be more effective in youth development, because it will help our schools be stronger, it will help our parks be safer, and it will help my community-based nonprofit grow. So it's critical, and I think one thing I do want to point out that's a nuance that I've always noticed in this is there's still a slight difference, though, in audience. There is what obviously I represent, and we saw Girls in the Game, America Scores, Girls on the Run. It's sports-based youth development. These are programs that specifically have as their mission to help kids achieve potential, whether or not that's sports, but to use sports as the avenue to do it. That's somewhat of a different audience than competitive youth suburban soccer. And I think part of the problem is we haven't made that distinction as policymakers and leaders in the field, because there's different needs. And some of those needs are really, the circles cross over. There's a lot that both sides can learn, but you have to speak to them differently. A competitive soccer coach doesn't necessarily want to learn about trauma-informed coaching right off the bat. And that's where we have to really continue this process of collaboration and communication.
Allison.
Okay. So my last question is, we've talked a lot about successful strategies for recruiting and training and retaining coaches. Do you all have strategies for when you need to relieve a coach who is not the right fit, for euphemistic?
I'll take this one. I think that starting with the mission out of the gate will reduce the number of times that happens, and then as well doing site visits so you can catch something early on and redirect, and that training over time, because otherwise you do see mission creep or drift from why we're all there. And then I think it is a lot of people burn out, right? We are asking them to do a lot. As you mentioned earlier, you know, their sport, the youth development piece, and so providing them other volunteer opportunities. Or it might be a time to just take a break from whatever that is specifically, or bringing them back to the mission. So our organization has core values that really drive everything that we do. And so it's really easy to have a conversation when everyone is targeting those core values. But yeah, it's difficult, especially as volunteers, and we need every volunteer out there so that every girl can participate.
Jim Thompson from the Positive Coaching Alliance talks about culture, how we do things here, and that importance of setting that standard ahead of time. And as Dan and Mo mentioned earlier at the start, we live in a society where we see stuff on TV and the kids emulate and the coaches emulate, and they emulate what their experience was 20 years ago when they had a coach who was perhaps doing things not best informed by best practices. And so This is about that collective awareness and raising the expectation. And I've long thought that we really need a series of public service announcements that talk about what does quality coaching look like. And if you look up into Canada, the Canadian Hockey Association has done some really nice PDAs around that kind of piece about what's acceptable and what's not. What do we look for both parents and coaches as we raise that expectation of what this looks like, what it should look like, and how it's informed.
Because we're with the school systems, it's a little bit different because the coaches are hired by the school systems, so we have to support the schools and help them to see that maybe that coach, needs a change in philosophy, or maybe the team needs a change in coach. And sometimes it comes from the parents and the athletes themselves to go back to the school district. And so ASP really works in a supportive role in that sense to help the schools maintain, good quality coaches. But ASP also does have a coaching ethics policy and coaching job descriptions that are clear in the policies so that we help the school districts to maintain that kind of standard.
Okay.
And I just ditto it that we have job descriptions. It's a national service term, but you have a job description to professionalize it. And if the job description isn't followed, then we will do a 30-day, 60-day, and then a termination.
Okay, thank you. We have to wrap up now.
Can I just say one more suggestion? Dan said earlier, one more thing to urge. He said earlier, and I actually think we need it. We need a Secretary of Sports, I think. This is a $1 trillion industry in this country. We need someone whose job it is, I think, to transfer, all that wealth and profit into how do we make our communities better. So Dan, I think we need the Secretary of Sports. I'd just suggesting add that to the plan. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, well, thank you all for sharing your thoughts and innovations and lessons learned about coaching. We appreciate it. Okay, well, we will take a break and we will resume at 3:45.
Produced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services at taxpayer expense.